There is no better time to be a podcast guest, right? As of this morning, there are 1,660,754 podcasts for you to be a guest on. That's the good news and the bad news. Now, most people will say, where do I start? Well, let me start with the biggest one. Bigger's got to be better, right? And they'll go out there. Well, even if you could get on Crime Junkies podcast and get heard by 6 million people, that's the number one podcast right now. How many of those do you think are your ideal customer? Chances are that is not the product for your market or your service. If you did get on, maybe you could become a meme and people would make fun of you on that. You see, bigger is not better. Better is better. There's a great podcast host, John Lee Dumas from Entrepreneur on Fire, that always talks about the riches are in the niches. And the same thing is true for podcast guests. Now, let me share you my story with this. Early on, I got to admit, I went on the Ego podcast, right? I got invited to a podcast that had 40,000 downloads. It was the biggest podcast I had ever been on up to that point. I mean, there are people, think about it, that would fill major league, some ballparks, right? I don't think Wrigley Field has 40,000 people in there. I was just thrilled. Well, I got on there and I made my offer, and you know what? I got about 24 leads from it. And that was great. I was thrilled to be there, and I could put it up on my website as seen on. Well, shortly after that, I went on to another podcast. And at the beginning, the host told me, yeah, I have 150 downloads per episode. Now, if I had known that, maybe I wouldn't have gone on that podcast from the very beginning. But it was a great podcast. It had my ideal audience for who I was talking to. So we had the conversation, did the interview, and you know what? I got nearly 100 leads from that podcast. So I know it was a small barrel. It was a bucket, but that bucket had my ideal customers in it. You know, there's more fish in the ocean than there are in a barrel, but if you can find that barrel, go there every time. So let's talk about, how do you find the better podcasts, the better podcast for you? And I would really look at 4 things from the very beginning. The first is, look at the host. So as you're looking at the name of the podcast, the description, everything like that, also look at the host. You see, most of the time, the listeners to a podcast are like the host or aspire to be like the host. So if you're going after C-level executives, you probably don't want to go on a podcast with some hosted by 20-something-year-old that starts out with yo, yo, yo. That's probably not a podcast that C-level executives are going to listen to. So look at the host. Is the host like your ideal customer? The second thing is there someone in your market that you could say is a similar avatar? You know, I am just like this person, or this person wrote a book similar to me. Well, go ahead and Google them. Find out what other podcasts they've been on. Help narrow down that 1.6 million. The third thing is, when you look at the podcast, go beyond just the description of the podcast. Go beyond just the estimated download numbers, if you can find those. Go into their social media and look and say, are the people that are engaging here with them, are they like my clients? You know, if you're, once again, going after big decision makers, if you're going after C-level executives, owners of the company, CMOs, CFOs for companies, and the podcast host is really, really big on TikTok, good for them. But I don't think your audience is going to be on TikTok. So check out the social media. The final thing is, look at the brand. Does this help you or hurt you? Going back to the example there, Crime Junkies, Number one podcast in the world. It's got over 6 million downloads. Rogan is number, I believe it's 17 right now. Crime Junkies has got him beat out of the water with that. Well, being on Crime Junkies podcast, would that help your brand or would that hurt your brand? It might be seen on a lot of things, but it's not really influential, right? Do you want to be seen at a riot by thousands, tens of thousands of people? If it gets caught on television, man, you could be seen by millions. Probably not the audience you want to be associated with. But if you got invited to Harvard University to talk, even if it was to talk to 100 people, would that build your brand up? Those are all things to look at. Avoid that whole trap of bigger is better. No, better is better. And the riches are in the niches in podcast guesting.